Welcome. I'm James Calicut, Waterfowl and Upland Gamebird Extension Specialist.
I'm Mark McConnell, Assistant Professor of Upland Birds at Mississippi State University.
Dr. Brian Davis, Professor, Waterfowl and Wetlands Conservation.
The three of us are all biologists and hunters. Join us for discussions about game bird conservation and management and the science behind it. Of course, we'll also have conversations about bird dogs and bird hunting as well. This is Gamebird University. All right. Well, we spent the last couple episodes talking a little bit outside of the wintering grounds. You know, we've had Scott Stevens and Frank Rower and Matt Chenard and several others. We're talking a lot about breeding habitat and the importance of the breeding grounds to duck populations and what drives duck populations. But, you know, I do my work in the South. I'm really interested in wintering ducks and non-breeding season activities, and really excited to have my good friend and colleague, Dr. Ryan Askren. He is the director of the Five Oaks Agricultural Research and Education Center. And so, Ryan, glad to have you on.
Hey, you nailed the name of the organization. So good work. It can be a little bit of a mouthful. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, James.
Yeah, no problem. It's much easier than Heath Hagee in the Happett office. You know,
yeah.
I think I had to practice that one before we did the show.
Yep. We're too adjacent to the governmental agencies to not use a bunch of acronyms.
Yeah. Yep. The wildlife or the conservation family in general here, we heart acronyms. In grad school, that's what. It's particularly my advisor, Rick Kaminsky. He loved acronyms. He would make anything into an acronym. Moist soil units for MSUs, things like that. He loved them, and we always joked and said, Rick, we should get you a T-shirt that just says "I heart acronyms." So.
Yeah. Oh goodness.
Anyway, speaking of Rick, most of the stuff that has been done here at Mississippi State, we've been real heavily focused on wintering grounds, and a lot of Rick's research through when I was coming through. A lot of the students in our lab, we were focused on, food availability and all those sort of things. And later, kind of started up some movement and habitat use stuff with Joe Lancaster's work but that was with VHF radio telemetry. And now we're in this whole other ball game. I can remember my first exposure to GPS transmitters was the early ones. You remember when they did that pilot study? Arkansas had about 20 or so.
Yeah.
We only had like 2 or 3, and I remember going with Rick over to Knoxville where they were training the MDWF&P guys on putting on those satellite transmitters. And at that time, that was the coolest technology, but it was like super expensive and really hard to get a big sample size, and you just had a dot every day on a map, kind of thing. It was but being able to see migration like that, which everybody doing VHF, you'd never been able to do that. So I just remember thinking, man, that's going to be awesome when we ever get around to where we can really use it. And now we're here.
We're here. Yeah, still lots of room for improvements, like we've talked about. But yeah, even when I started, I guess would have been 2012 with Dr. Doug at UAM working on white fronts. I'm glad you got one representing behind you.
Oh, yeah, we're both.
But the GPSs we put on those poor birds were just huge, boxy, and they had solar panels. They were good.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I just remember getting to see the tracks all the way from Arcanda down to Arkansas and Louisiana. It was just mind blowing. I knew that technology was out there at that point, but to actually get to play with some of that, especially as a young kind of career professional, really cool opportunity.
Well, for sure. I know that's something that we, like when I was a state duck biologist, Houston Havens and I used to talk a lot about. It's like, man, if we could just get a big sample size of these birds, we could answer so many questions, and never thought we'd ever get around to doing it. And now here we are, and I'm excited that I'm getting to do it now that I'm back into the academic circle of things.
Head first back into the academic circle.
Yeah, head first. Yeah. Big time. So yeah, it's exciting to get to do this kind of work. But, like you said, it's not without, a lot more things that we need to learn about associated with doing this type of work and knowing what our limitations are and such as that. But it certainly is a very attractive type of research, obviously. Like I think Frank put it in one of our last few podcasts, is that it's like crack to duck biologists GPS transmitter, and he's not wrong. I mean,
yeah,
it's pretty exciting to get into that type of work, but I mean, you really can answer some cool questions with them, and so
I think it's always good to kind of talk about those questions and why we're doing that, and it kind of goes back to to what is habitat. It's the conditions, biotic and abiotic, that allow for occupancy or presence of a given species in that area. And that's really kind of what my focus has been, how kind of movements are related to the landscape and the habitat that's on the ground, and using that. So we assume that, if good habitat means birds are going to do better there, then if they're selecting for it, if they're using disproportionate to what it's available, that should benefit them. And obviously that's really important to understand as we go through these changes in, population dynamics, ups and downs, different kind of shifts in distributions, perceived differences in migration, really starting to nail down what aspects out here influencing those movements are incredibly important to how we manage the landscape, both, on the local scale, like out here on Five Oaks, where I'm fortunate enough to work, understanding kind of how those different land cover types are influencing their movements around here, but also at the landscape scale, understanding, that complex of wetlands and what they might be looking for on the landscape to influence them. So that's really kind of the core of why, at least the work that you're, working on, the work that I've kind of been focused on through a lot of my graduate school. That's kind of the core of it. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why this stuff is so important. It's really sexy. There are, we recognize there are limitations, but the lessons we can learn from it, I think, are incredibly important if we're getting a good understanding of how those birds are moving about and what resources they're using. That's incredibly important for management.
For sure. I think being able to really get a snapshot or paint a picture of how those birds use the landscape. Are there things they are selecting disproportionate to their availability? Like you said, kind of what all do they need to hit that whole suite of resources that make up habitat, especially in context of the landscape. And so that can kind of tell us, especially if we were to look at how landscapes have changed. We all know that they have at various portions of the valley. Kind of help explain issues, when we have some of these perceptions out there too. Maybe, there's some things that may be more important than we thought they were, and maybe some of those things are limiting on landscapes, and they're in landscapes that have that component to it. Yeah, better understanding that habitat use and what really makes up that whole suite of resources they need during winter is going to, in relation to landscapes, is going to be critical for us to do future conservation planning, refine things from a joint venture perspective about habitat planning. It's going to be, those are the things that we need to be looking at. There's all kinds of gee whiz cool stuff with this, but what it really comes down to at the end of the day is what are we going to learn that is going to inform sound conservation planning, and then also down to the scale of the property and the landowner and how you address goals and objectives for folks on the ground at that level too.
Yeah. No, and that's, I guess, just kind of going back, and I've, been fortunate to work with Dr. Doug Osborne at UAM for quite some time now. And just a few of the, kind of cooler things I think have come out of this is one, he had a master's student, Starla Dean, and I helped her along with some of her analyses and some working at effects of moon phase on kind of nocturnality of movements of widgeon, of green-winged teal, of mallards. And that really demonstrated one of the things we kind of knew is going on, that mallards are switching to more nocturnal movements, spending a lot more time going out to feed at night. Ethan Dittmer's project with Doug also kind of followed up on that, showed that they were pretty much staying on sanctuaries and going out to private lands, private rice fields to feed at night in a very, highly disturbed landscape, and working to understand, some of the kind of nuances within that, how weather might change those, some of those things to really inform harvest. So it's not, we always think about habitat as just kind of the vegetation and what's there, but really disturbance, hunters are part of it. They're a biotic factor that's out on the landscape, that's influencing movements.
Yeah, so it's not just the vegetation, like you said, not just presence of competitors and predators, but we're in that kind of predator and disturbance in that too, So that's all part of what's driving that. I guess what their realized niche is out there. Where well,
that kind of leads into another. And this is not peer reviewed. We have not published this yet, so I don't want to make any big claims before that happens. But I do want to point out that we've got evidence that predation risk, both human disturbance but aerial predators as well, are probably influencing what ducks are selecting on the landscape, to where we're seeing a really high selection for buttonbush reservoirs, so that really dense kind of scrub-shrub wetlands. And it makes sense because it's providing a thermal barrier, so it's helping them kind of thermoregulate better in these cold periods. But even during warmer periods, they're using it. So could be the shade of that, but I I kind of would hypothesize that the disturbance, the fact that they're in there, blocks all the noise that's kind of coming to them from vehicles, from people, but also giving that overhead cover from predators.
Yeah,
Just
I often go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, just one of those things that I think has kind of been underappreciated on the landscape that could be having a huge effect on where these birds are spending their winter and kind of building large numbers.
Yeah, and I know you and I have had that conversation before about scrub-shrub wetlands and their importance and that being an element of it. And it really got me to thinking more because when I think of like screening cover, I'm usually thinking about bobwhites or some other bird, but it makes sense that waterfowl would do that as well and select for areas where they have some level of screening cover. We've even talked about coffeeweed in moist soil wetlands potentially serving as some form of screening cover. And you start talking about coffeeweed being a good part of moist soil wetlands, and people have very, very staunch opinions on that.
Yep. No, but that's one of those things that this transmitter data can help inform.
Yeah.
And that we aren't really in a direct structured way looking at here, but something we're definitely thinking of and thinking if we can't set up some field experiments to better understand how that could be contributing to duck use.
Yeah, because that's the thing with this. You might see something in the telemetry data that leads you to it seems to kind of draws questions, and you like, okay, well, what do we need to do to look at that without telemetry, just looking at those types of wetlands in a more, smaller, finer scale where we're going and setting up, looking at differences in vegetation and duck use, just bird observations and that sort of thing to maybe better tease out some of those questions of some pattern you're noticing from this broader, kind of data.
Yeah, right. Really, answering good questions just leads to more questions.
Exactly. It's kind of like what we were talking about before I got on here. I was telling you about the neat stuff we were seeing with the dove harvest data and some of the landscape change, and we saw some things were exactly kind of what we would hypothesize, and then there's these odd other relationships, and it's like, well, maybe we need to put transmitters on doves, to kind of tease out what some of these relationships are, and so yeah. I think it's just like any science, you go into it wanting to answer a question and you come out of it with more questions than you have answers. You get some answers and you get some cool stuff that leads you to the next thing to look at to better understand it. Just a continual trying to reduce uncertainty about something.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's good stuff. Yeah, and so I guess I'll just talk a little bit about what we're doing here at Five Oaks. So I'm director of a little nonprofit research education center here near Humphrey, Arkansas. I've been here, I guess, going on 3 years now. Like I said, I come from a research background, went to school up in Wisconsin, came down here to Arkansas to UAM for my master's, and then bounced up to Illinois for my doctorate. I was really asked to come back here as a postdoc, kind of research associate, and kind of rolled into this position working here on property, largely to kind of continue to move our graduate certificate program home. So I work on training young people on kind of the habitat management side of things, taking some of that ecological knowledge, really building in more of the kind of wetland waterfowl side, depending on their background, but then getting them working out here on our properties, actually managing wetlands and even going through the full cycle of duck season, seeing what it's like to kind of operate a duck hunting lodge. So incredibly blessed to be here. And I mean, I've got my dream job. And part of that is I get to, still play a lot in the research side of things. I've got a lot of other things that I have to give focus to as well. But really, we're working to understand how we can better the habitat, better the landscape for waterfowl down here in Arkansas. Incredibly important. Obviously, the breeding grounds are important. I know most of your last few podcasts have been on breeding habitat conditions, those kind of things. And that's great. That is absolutely the primary driver of waterfowl populations. But I always like to point out, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with it, but carryover effects, which basically says that, as the health of a bird in one period in time during winter carries over to spring migration, which then carries over to the nesting period. And there's been lots of great evidence from that. Dr. Senger, more recently, Dr. Mitch Wiegman and his lab really has put out some great data to support that there are these carryover effects, that when we have better habitat down here in the lower Mississippi alluvial valley on the wintering grounds, we have better productivity up in the breeding in the prairie pothole region. So that's why we're doing it here. I mean, that's rightfully so. There's been a lot of attention placed on the breeding grounds, but we're also really passionate about waterfowl populations and the culture and abundances that come here. So obviously, waterfowl have wings. They were engineered to kind of go wherever the resources were best, and they can do that on a continental scale. So really, ensuring that we continue to provide quality habitat here is incredibly important, not just for the overall population, but also to ensure that we have the hunting opportunities that we've been able to enjoy for so long in Arkansas.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's why I'm here. One of the things we're going to focus on today is the transmitter stuff, but we're doing a little bit of diet stuff. So like we talked about, the habitat, the resources they're using, incredibly important. There's been some great studies, a lot of them originally out of Mississippi State, looking at some of the dietary kind of winter diets of waterfowl. Lots of great stuff out of Southern Illinois University and other places too. But we have begun collecting fecal samples from ducks to use metabarcoding, just kind of a novel technique, some of the same stuff that Dr. Davis and his doctoral student have done there, but amplifying the DNA, comparing that to a database, understanding what they're eating. And really we did that. We're very passionate about bombland hardwood forests. There's a lot of work going into bombland hardwood forests in this state because we've lost a lot of them. And we've seen kind of that red oak component disappearing because they're less water tolerant. Hydrology's changed. We're holding more water in these woods than they would have naturally. And there was a lot of debate on how necessary it was to change the hydrology, kind of oftentimes reducing hunting opportunity because obviously people are used to having their woods flooded up all season long. They get a hunt all season long, and now we're letting it kind of flood up more naturally when we get rains. So yeah, that motivated this kind of diet analysis within that. And I just want to throw out acorns were the number one the number one occurring food item in the diets, followed by moist soil plants. So millet, smartweed, panicum were all up there. And then quite a few invertebrates. And one of the biggest surprises out of that was rice was actually all the way down at number 8. So we think of rice as being kind of the premier food habitat for waterfowl in the state. And we weren't seeing that, at least with the mallards that were harvested here on property.
Yeah, I'm getting, we do have a kind of a small sample size of some fecal samples that we're going to get analyzed from here and from Mississippi. And I'm looking forward to getting some of that information back too. Just kind of picked an area of the Delta and just collected kind of just their hunter harvested birds and pulled samples from them. Finally found a undergraduate student that was passionate enough about ducks that they're willing to squeeze poop out all day in and day out over the USDA lab. So
yep.
So I keep telling them, like, I came up in the Kaminsky era of we have to core sample every single project, and estimating food abundance. I was like, I sorted through dirt for seeds for years, in the lab. You got to start somewhere.
Yep. No, and that's a lot of the best research has been some of the hardest. That's why it hasn't been done before. That's why we didn't know those things.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's absolutely. I'm still trying to take the easier route and find even easier ways to do it.
Well, certainly fecal DNA too can be a lot easier than having to collect, actively foraging birds and going through that. Of course, I mean, it depends on what your question is. If it's more of like a food selection thing, then you're going to have to experimentally collect birds and sample habitat or sample the wetlands where they're feeding, that sort of thing. But yeah, if you can just get if you're just interested in this area, what are the top food items that these birds are foraging on, what seems to be important. Yeah, this new technology with the fecal DNA analysis is just incredible.
Yeah, and all that to say, these transmitters are incredible tools. But we also have lots of other really neat tools, and I know we're both working other avenues and directions to understand waterfowl and kind of what benefits them and how we can better conserve them. But yeah, transmitter stuff. I'll let you talk about what you've been working on. I think a good bit about it, but we're both going a few different directions with it. I've been working really closely with Dr. Osborne's students, so we've deployed about 196 transmitters here on Five Oaks the last 3 years.
Is that per year or total?
No, total.
Okay.
Total, yeah. So we've been about 70 per year. We've really been focused on winter habitat use. So we're trying to catch these ducks in November before hunting season because of federal baiting laws. We have to have all the bait off our property because we are guiding hunters out here. So we are really cautious about ensuring that we've got all the bait off, several days before that 10-day window before season. So we bust our butts to go out, get ducks on bait and get them in traps before hunting season. We've been pretty successful. There was one year we weren't able to make it happen before season. Ducks just showed up late. The weather was a little different. The moon phase was a little different. I don't know what it was, but they were really just showing up 10 days before season, so we weren't able to catch them. But doing that's been really neat to see how they move across the landscape, look at sanctuary use. Of course, a lot of these ducks are captured on sanctuary. They're here from the start, so we can have conversations about, representation of the population and kind of the inferences we can draw from that. But we've had transmitters on the landscape all hunting season to get to watch how they move, how they avoid disturbance, what kind of habitats they're using, and look at harvests. We're right next to the WMA, and one of the big conversations that's kind of come out is, they're not using the WMA, or it's perceived that the private land is hogging all the ducks around the WMA, and I see it a lot on Facebook groups. Sanctuary is the devil because all the ducks are going in there, and I can't shoot all of them. My kind of read from our data is that without those sanctuary areas, we wouldn't have those ducks around. So we have a lot of ducks that obviously feed the public hunting land that mostly stay on private sanctuary. We've got a lot that stay on the public sanctuary and come to private land. So that's one of the biggest things that I always try to emphasize is we're working together. It's not that one person's hogging the ducks. By providing a complex of habitat in these areas, that's really key to keep them there. Because they're gonna maximize their survival. They want to live. They want to fly back and pass on their genes. Mm-hmm. So of course they're going to go to areas where they're less likely to die, to where they're able to get the food they need and find a mate and those things. But the more of that we have in an area, the more ducks we hold all through season. And then when we have these weather events or really we're shooting the dumb ones, right? So we're not shooting the majority of them. We shouldn't expect all the ducks we have transmitters on to be in the hunting areas. Really, we're just chipping away a small percentage, and that's the beauty of kind of waterfowl management in North America is why it's been so successful. Is we have these people that care about it. They're able to utilize that resource without it being a detriment to the resource, providing these habitats, harvesting a relatively small proportion of the population. We're able to do that year after year. So no, that's been one of the cool things with those transmitters is see how they move, and then it's almost like when one's about to get shot because they move out of their normal core area, start doing something else, go to another property, and it just seems like it's about half the time you see one do that, you end up getting a phone call, or you see the transmitter end up at somebody's house.
Yeah.
But those are some of the things that we're thinking about going forward and working to better understand to really improve the opportunities and the landscape for both ducks and hunters.
Yeah. And I think I hear that argument all the time. And, most of the places where there are sanctuaries available, like you said, those are the places that do have more ducks. If you've got public land in the area, a portion of that is sanctuary. And if you have private lands around, they're well managed. A lot of those are going to have sanctuary areas, built into their management plan. And it's really increased. I always tell people, don't worry about what your neighbor's doing as much, because you're all working together to build this complex of wetlands that is going to attract birds and hold birds in this landscape that will provide you opportunity for harvest potentially. And so find where you fit into the mix of the wetland complex. What are they providing? What are they not providing? What do you have the potential to provide? Because chances are if you remove that WMA or you opened up that sanctuary to hunting, you're not going to hold as many birds as you did before. So, or if it wasn't there at all, you wouldn't have the capacity to hold ducks in your landscape if it was just whatever was there without that. It certainly is it's a tough thing to think about because you see all those ducks going down there. But
yep.
we certainly do see birds moving. I don't have a lot of data yet, but just what we got within the month of February last year from when we were marking those birds, and we only marked about 18. It was So, but just looking at that, even during February when there is no hunting going on and whatnot, they kind of got their key areas, that they're kind of moving in, and then some weather happens and they bounce around different stuff. But I'm really looking forward to having like what you have, get to see them through hunting season and see how they're moving, and then at least in areas where there might be high disturbance, seeing how they're reacting to that. I think disturbance is probably one of the hardest things to tease out.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how, unless you're in a landscape that's very small,
Yeah.
and you could put out a lot of ARUs or something and get that kind of data. But even then, you're not picking up the other things that are disturbance too. Like, are you driving around
right
scouting for ducks or what have you? So I think disturbance is like the hardest thing in waterfowl management to research.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
too much stuff going on, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dr. Brad Cohen's lab has done some great stuff over the last few years. I know they've been quantifying, you know, the number of blinds in an area, then the number of blinds that are active based on whether they have motion decoys, which I think in that part of the world is probably a fair estimate of if a blind is active. Might be less applicable down here in Arkansas. Using ARUs to measure gunshots, and then also doing some kind of experimental disturbance work, which is really neat. There was some of it done back in Missouri. I really don't know who all was involved with that, but I would guess Frederickson, maybe Lisa Webb a little later on, with some good work there. But there's still a lot of questions pertaining to that to really understand how the human aspect influences waterfowl movements.
Yeah, we did a little bit back in
the
late 2000s too. Some WMA hunt management, you know, 2 versus 4 days a week on our popular waterfowl hunting WMAs, and didn't really see a whole lot of difference in total harvest between 2 versus 4, but there definitely was a difference in the composition of that harvest, I believe. Like, you shot more mallards when you were only hunting 2 days versus 4 days a week.
Yeah. Well, that's something that, you know, I hear parallels drawn between, you know, turkeys to ducks and all sorts of things that really aren't fair comparisons. But even when we think about ducks, I mean, their ecology is completely different, and that's one of the things with Sarla's projects is we figured out that once we rolled into hunting season, mallards were moving a lot more at night, especially when there was a more full moon, when they had more moonlight to kind of do that. But teal really didn't seem to have any. You know, they kind of moved whenever throughout, from duck season, you know, before duck season, during duck season, and after duck season, without any real signal of differences.
Yeah. So that's the next thing too, is that there's a lot of other species, and you know, you're looking at mallards, you're looking at a very generalist species, and then you look at something like a pintail or a green wing, it's quite a bit different, you know. Maybe even wetland complexes. What kind of landscapes are better for those birds might be different than what we know as of right now for things like mallards.
Absolutely.
But no, I'm really looking forward to getting ours started. We're ready to go full operational with it. I probably won't get much. I am at a point where I'm more excited, I believe, about getting out there and putting transmitters on birds and getting this project started, actually, as much as I am hunting, you know. But I'm sure when it gets to hunting season, I'll be really ready to go hunting instead of trying to trap these infuriating ducks.
No, that's about a week and a half of trapping before hunting season, and you're ready to put the traps away and start. Yeah.
If I have one more time of looking at the Tacticam thing on my phone, and I've got 20 mallards back in the deep back of a trap, and this wall of gadwall and teal and wood ducks between them and the door, and I immediately leave to go to that trap, and apparently the parting of the seas of gadwall occurred, and the mallards just swam right out. You know, I got like 3 in there, and I had 15. You know,
No.
That's enough to make me want to go shoot some of them for sure.
Yeah. No lie.
But we're going to do preseason trapping as well. Hopefully we'll have some luck. You know, we certainly, like a lot of folks see, you know, if you've got water early in the year, and as long as we aren't in like a historic drought or something that potentially could keep birds from, you know, coming any further south, which I think that seemed to be the case because we didn't even have any early migrants. What year was that? Was that the year before last?
Yes. Yeah, it would have been 23.
So even gadwall and stuff were
22 maybe. Yeah, 22. It would have been 22 that we really struggled.
And that was really, really tough. I'd hated to have been trapping like y'all were that year. Bearing we don't have that. You know, hopefully we'll be able to, you know, not ban or transmit as many as we'd like, but hopefully we get enough of them on air pre-hunting season, and then do quite a bit after hunting season as well. So I'm excited to get to see some of that. Hopefully maybe some of these we've got out now will show back up. Fingers crossed on that one.
Yeah. No, you're working in a very different landscape over there than what we have over here, especially this part of Arkansas. I mean, there's a lot of variation across the Delta in Arkansas, but a little bit of time I spent over there with you this past February, it's shocking. I mean, so much more row crop, so much more kind of sandier, loamier ground. It's not holding water, and
it's not.
Seems less of these surrogate rice field wetlands.
Yes,
that's one of the biggest. It's like, man, there's not habitat anywhere until you get to the private places that are really, intent on taking care of that habitat.
Yeah. So that's that's what's going to be interesting about looking at it over here. It is such a different landscape than Arkansas or West Tennessee and some of these other places that, of course, West Tennessee is totally different from either one of us, really too. So all of us are studying pretty similar, have a lot of similar questions, but it's in very different landscapes, even though they're all part of the valley. Yeah, Mississippi has much more of some large wetland complexes, and historically, I think, we had a lot more interest in hunting, waterfowl hunting, because I can remember as a kid, my father was from the Delta, so I'd go for Christmas and Thanksgiving, all that, over to Tutwiler, Tallahatchie County, and go see my grandparents. And I used to love those trips to driving to go to the holiday dinners, because the whole ride down like Highway 3 and then down Highway 6 or vice versa, and you were going to see flooded fields and you're going to get to see ducks. I could make that same trip now in December right before Christmas and would not see near the water I saw back then. And so it's almost like we still have these big complexes of wetlands, but there's not much of I'll throw Ryan Dulaney a bone here with his term. There's not a lot of connective tissue between those places. And so it's a really different landscape than it was before. And I think it's just going to be interesting to see how birds traverse our landscape, especially even compared to 10 years ago when Joe Lancaster did his VHF stuff. It'll be pretty interesting to see what we can tease out of things and see what they do. But yeah, trapping, and so I'm trying to get enough trapping sites across the North Delta, so we can get a good snapshot of how birds using it. But there's some areas, even in the North Delta, that where you're like, there's nowhere, I can't think of a place to trap over in this neck of the woods, because there's just no habitat. It's a moonscape of hipped up, rode up fields, and then you might have a break or something here and there, and it's tough in some places. So, but it will be interesting to see how it goes, especially that preseason trapping. I can only imagine, even as infuriating as it can be in February when you got all where they're at and you got a ton of them.
Oh, yeah.
So
there's a lot of food on the landscape too in November. That's what we ran into, is why swim into a trap that's got a little bit of millet in it when you've got a 40-acre field that's flooded up just half a mile away.
Yep.
It's a fun learning experience. Yeah. I'm sure you guys will do great. You guys will do great. As long as the mallards show up, I know you'll catch them.
That's the thing. Just got to hope they show up. The early ones show up, but then it's just that, how are you going to get them to get concentrated and get in a trap? But yeah, I'm looking forward to it though.
Yeah. Well, I guess you wanna chat about transmitter attachment and some of that work we've been.
Yeah, I think that's a good.
We've been over here.
Yeah, segue to talking about just how we're trying to make sure that doing as much as we can to make sure these units aren't impacting their behavior and or could be potentially harmful to them. So I think that's a good place for us to go with the conversation.
Yeah. So like we've talked about, I mean, these transmitters kind of, we as researchers kind of got really excited with the possibilities, with things that we know we could learn from really understanding. And it's everything we're doing is really kind of monitoring. So we have to observe that duck somehow, either go out with spotting scope, counting them, doing behavioral observations. Banding is just another form of observing a duck. And same with these transmitters. These transmitters just allow us to observe those ducks. We could observe them every 10 minutes or almost continuous at this point. We've been working with our data, and that's really exciting. And there's huge utility in that, I think. But we also know that ducks are engineered to be really good flying machines. So anytime we're doing something, even band, we're impacting them in some way, right? Like just us catching them, stressing them, putting something on them, especially, that's going to change them. So one of one of the big concerns. Obviously, we're using these observations to understand that population and to make management decisions, harvest regulation decisions, even policy decisions sometimes with it. So it's important to understanding what's potentially biasing those observations. Transmitters, even early on, I mean, scientists raised some flags. Miller was one of the first studies, and I know Dr. Jerry Hupp was on that as well, who's with the Alaska Science Center. But really understanding that, we're putting something external on this bird, it's going to influence their movement. So we really have, a few options, very few options in how we do this. So we can put a backpack on them that we typically tie on with an elastic harness. So that's what we've been doing. That's what's really kind of become popular. It's really easy. You don't need a whole team to do that. Like James or I could tie one on in under 15 minutes pretty easily, make sure it's a good fit, make sure it's sitting the way it should, and get ready to release that bird. So it's very easy to do. Because they're external, they have a solar panel, so they have a rechargeable battery. In theory, are going to last the lifetime of that duck until it dies. That's of course not always the case. We do have software or hardware failure with those transmitters, and we're kind of trying to understand some of that as well. On the other side, we've got implants, so we can actually surgically implant, called a big 9-volt battery. Is about the size. They're typically 25 grams in the ones we're doing, and that's great because it's completely internal. It's not messing with the the external aerodynamics of the bird. It just has a little antenna that kind of comes out the back right above its tail. So we kind of expect that those would have less of an impact. There's some other ways. Obviously smaller radio tags that might be able to be preened in that wouldn't be rechargeable, would be hard to track. We also have satellite tags that can be a lot smaller if they don't have that solar panel, because they can be preened in underneath those feathers. And we also have geolocators. They're the little kind of pucks that you see on bands sometimes, especially on the lovely band hunter pages. And a lot of people call them, oh, it's a GPS tracker. It's not a GPS tracker. It's not a transmitter. That is only logging the sunrise and sunset time based on like an atomic clock, a clock that was set to a computer. Those are really core scale. You have to get those back to get the data from them, because we're estimating based on sunrise sunset time. There's a lot of errors around summer solstice. It gets really weird, and those are some of the things that some people have been really successful with, really good at working with. I'm relatively new to it and still learning that technology for sure. So really understanding, one, kind of how those different attachment types, different ways that we can observe a duck's large scale movements, local scale movements, is really important. And two, figuring out where we need to go, how we can improve these things. There are a lot of people, especially down Louisiana, up in Canada now, North Dakota, working on some better attachment methods. So different ways to attach those transmitters, ways that might not be kind of constricting the breast muscles as much. So I'll talk about some of the comparisons we're doing. I don't mean to pretend like we're the only ones doing these. There are a lot of folks that are looking at this, thinking about these questions. But we worked with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, the Missouri Department of Conservation, Ducks Unlimited, of course UAM, Division of Ag, and then us here at Five Oaks, to put on a bunch of these different transmitter attachment types right before spring migration to really understand how they're influencing spring migration. And hopefully we'll get into even further questions about some of these local scale movements, some of the habitat use, those things. I won't dive much into those because I've just kind of started to scratch the surface with those, but really to understand how these attachments are influencing birds. So I'll talk about backpacks and implants for the most part, because I think those are the most interesting, and those are the ones I have the most confidence in the data we have for those. So you think about these, how they're affecting kind of the ecology, these birds. So of course you have survival. So if a bird's feeling constricted, if it's having to deal with this transmitter, it's probably going to have lower survival. It's not going to be able to make up the energy, be more at risk of predators. We also have, daily movements or migratory movements. So basically how far they can fly in a day, or how far they want to fly in a day, how big of a migratory jump they're making. A stopover duration was another one we looked at. So just how long a duck stayed in an area during migration. So say it flew from here down to Arkansas to southwest Missouri, how long it stayed in southwest Missouri before it moved further north. And then also we looked at latitude and kind of timing of that migration. So just real quick, we did find that ducks during migration, especially what I would call peak of migration in March, the implants occurred further north than than the backpack transmitters by about a week. So they were typically a degree of latitude, like 1.5 degrees of latitude further north than the backpack units. We really didn't see big differences in the step length of the movements, not as big as I kind of would have thought, given those latitudinal differences. Gotta look at some of my figures just to make sure. So the step lengths weren't hugely different. There were differences in the timing, not the timing of departure. So all of our ducks left kind of respective wintering areas where they were captured at about the same time. But we did see longer stopovers in the backpacks by a couple of days over the implants. So they were staying in areas, and we kind of hypothesized if there's more drag on that bird, then they're probably spending more energy to fly that distance, and because they've spent that energy, they have to make that up before they move to another location. So that was one of those interesting things. And I will point out these were pretty much during March was kind of the main month that we saw differences. And then the arrival of these backpack birds was later to the prairies by about 9-10 days. I think was about the average. And that's interesting. Obviously, it's important to understand that, important to, kind of qualify our expectations. So kind of the big takeaways there. One, we probably shouldn't be using these transmitters to estimate timing of migration, or if we are, we should know that there might be some correction factor. It's kind of like our visual, aerial surveys. We come up with correction factors based on other survey methods. So that's one of the things we've talked about. Survival, I guess I didn't touch on. So survival is tough because we're interested in some of those fine scale, like hourly movements. We kept the duty cycles the same on the implant transmitters because the implants don't have solar panels. A lot of those batteries died before the end of kind of the study period, before the end of spring migration. So we did find some interactive effects of transmitter type with fate. So we had more backpack transmitters die we had the bird die, had a mortality event. So that backpack was, located, not moving around after it had clearly been on a bird. And we can look at temperature and other accelerometer stuff to kind of infer that remotely. But then the implants died at a higher rate. The transmitter failed at a higher rate because we were running out of battery quick. So those were tough to tease apart. Really, when it boiled down to everything, there weren't huge differences, but like I said, some of that could have been due to some of the differences and kind of how those transmitters were, either those birds were dying or the transmitters were failing. So yeah, I would say estimating survival solely based on transmitters is something we need to qualify when we're making these inferences, and do our best to kind of find other sources to relate back to those estimates.
And and probably too, as far as like timing of movements within spring migration, like you said, that obviously there's a difference there between the backpacks and the implants. But you said there was no difference in like their initial initiation date of.
Yeah.
So you can trust that kind of information.
Yep.
Somewhat.
It seems like the departure dates when they initiate that spring migration, when they leave this region, seems to be. What is
y'all's right now? March 15th-ish, or when is y'all's?
Yeah, it's right around there. I think March 12th. Let me see. I know I've got it written down somewhere, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I should say, and Bass Pro was a huge partner in this program, so we were able to put transmitters on in Missouri and Arkansas. It wasn't just Arkansas, so we really had two wintering areas in there.
I think most of mine, because like I said, just 18 birds, so not a lot to make any kind of draw serious conclusions from. But I think the first bird left around the 8th or 9th of March, but most of them left between the 12th and like the 17th.
Yeah.
They were all kind of stretched across that. So.
Yep. No, ours was March 16th with, a standard deviation, not standard error, of 16 days. So there was a good amount of variation across those. But yeah, March 16th. And again, I don't want to make any big claims without kind of qualifying some of these things. These birds were caught after season, and we know from our preseason transmitters, we have a lot that jump states or start jumping further north even before the season's over. So I'm not saying that's a perfect estimate, but it is interesting that it lined up so well with y'all's over there in Mississippi too.
Yeah. And also might be a really good plug for maybe you should hold some water
Amen.
So,
No, that's not on your woods. Not on
yeah,
your
not on your
woods.
woods.
We need to give the woods a break.
Yeah, and
But
within
for the love of God, please
yeah.
please leave some water on the landscape because these mallards do want to stick around. We don't see them
Mhm.
because there's no water left. There's no habitat
Yeah.
for them left after season.
And so, yeah,
But they do want to be here where there is.
as much as you can, obviously for producers out there, what's the maximum you can leave water before it starts impacting, your plans for spring planting and things like that. But certainly, within whatever fits your property, what you can hold water as late as you can hold it. Because that's a lot of the reason too. We get a lot of folks that do have their private property. And imagine if you drove to any public land in February, because they're going to be holding water for moist soil management, and those private landowners that manage moist soil are going to be holding that water as well. And ton of my landowners I work with that manage moist soil, they'll be like, well, they all showed up after duck season, and it's probably a lot of that is due to the fact that every piece of ag water on the landscape, and a lot of duck impoundments where people tend to just be planting something instead of doing moist soil management, they'll draw those things down right after duck season, so they got to go somewhere.
Yep.
And so,
yep. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's another plug for moist soil management. Like I said, with that diet study, we saw really good usage. I mean, occurrence of invertebrates in the diets all through season, even during the cold periods, but especially later into the year. And having diversity of plant, that organic matter out there gives a better diversity and abundance of invertebrates. And that's really key, especially before, spring migration and leading up to the breeding season, obviously.
Sure.
Really key once they get up to the breeding grounds, but here too.
Absolutely. So yeah, and that's that's just one example of, what we try to do with all this research is, we find out that, okay, ducks are hanging around in this landscape till this time. Maybe we should have some habitat for them. So, translating this stuff into, recommendations down to the landowner level and helping people make their property better for waterfowl. So,
yep, absolutely.
That's the cool stuff. I was trying to think. I know we don't want to get into this too heavy because we're already like 50 minutes into this. But because I find it super, super interesting, and I don't think a lot of people have ever heard about it. But just let's talk a little bit about your PhD, because I thought like you and the others in that lab at the time doing the research with the Canada geese, and is that when your PhD was in that?
Yep.
Part?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was getting ready to finish my master's down here in Arkansas, and I had one of our mutual friends, Heath Hagee, call me up and said, "Hey, I've got this project that we're kind of continuing on. We're gonna have a doctoral student on it, and I think you'd be a good fit. Love for you to apply." And I kind of looked at it as a urban Canada goose project, as a city goose project, and kind of hemmed and hawed. I love Heath, have a ton of respect for him. Had a lot of respect for Mike Ward, the other advisor that was kind of on the project. So I applied. They offered it to me, and I moved up to Illinois, started it, and it really was like I've always been a Canada goose hunter. Like I love hunting them. I love everything about them. I just didn't want to work in Chicago, but really fell in love with it. I mean, it was a really neat project. The adaptability of those geese is incredible. The anger that they can possess is pretty substantial. The number of times I got walloped in the head or saw other people get walloped in the head by angry nesting geese was fun. But yeah, we got to put neck collars on them, some of which are still going 9 years later.
Dang.
So some really long-term transmitter data on some of those birds. And I should say this is with the Illinois Natural History Survey, Forbes Biological Research Station, University of Illinois. But yeah, it was really kind of focused around tracking movements around Midway International Airport. So we looked at some kind of weather and habitat characteristics, kind of what they were using around the airport that were influencing them flying across some of the GPS approach paths, the paths that geese or that airplanes would have actually been taking to come in and land, take off. But got to look at some other really cool stuff. And the student before me, Brett Dorak, had already started seeing it. We had a lot of geese using rooftops. They looked at some of the kind of thermal dynamics of those rooftops, trying to figure out why they're up there. But yeah, these big warehouse rooftops in the middle of industrial Chicago act as basically a sanctuary area. So even though they're big Canada geese, they don't have a ton of predators. Although there are coyotes in all those city parks, like we saw them daily. But probably just to get away from the humans and the dogs, especially during these cold times, would go up on these rooftops and just loaf and sit up there, sometimes for days. So what a lot of it kind of morphed into, and I'm still working on a couple of publications. I've got one that I need to resubmit that was rejected with option to resubmit. But really understanding the kind of evolutionary pressures that might lead them to do those things. So why the heck they'd be in a city eating this really poor nutritional grass on these frozen lawns all winter instead of living in the corn-rich kind of landscape? It was predation risk. They're really smart birds. They're able to avoid that risk from hunting and probably some other predators as well by staying in these areas. Instead of hitting those really energy rich foods, they're able to feed constantly when it's warm, even though it's not very nutritional grass, and then they're able to just sit. They're able to hunker down and try to conserve as much as they can. One of the crazier things was during one of those polar vortexes. It's like a bet hedging thing. We had all the ones in the rural areas move further south, kind of at the onslaught of that storm, and then we had a bunch stay in the city, and a bunch of the ones in the city just froze to death. I mean, we went out one morning and there were 30 or 40 that had just frozen to death on the ice overnight. In the city park, including one of my transmitters out on some nice thin ice. So yeah, really, really cool birds. And then molt migration is the other one that a lot of people don't know canada geese do. And there's some questions how far south they do this. But a lot of these geese still fly to what was probably their ancestral molting habitat up along Hudson Bay in Canada. So I had one bird that was literally eating croutons from some lady feeding it in a city park, and a week later it was up on Hudson Bay, probably having to deal with polar bears and wolverines and what else. But they probably go up there. It's probably back when the landscape before we had all these fertilized lawns. And this was another part of my thesis or my dissertation was these fertilized lawns are probably providing more molting habitat than what would have been there historically, to where there would just been these kind of pond wetland edges that would dry down and have really nitrogen-rich grasses, but those would kind of get taken up by all the family flocks, the ones that had broods. So the ones that didn't breed or had a failed nest, whatever, would probably make this molt migration. And there's no cost. They'd go molt up there. The predators, I mean, it's wide open, so they really didn't have to worry about predators much. Coming back southward now, we have a lot of hunting in Wisconsin, Minnesota during that early Canada goose season in September, but that wouldn't have been there. So they would have had very little cost to kind of make that migration and come back. Now there's a cost. Now we have more kind of molting good nitrogen-rich grasses in these urban areas. That's probably changing the balance. I mean, changing the selective pressure on that behavior, and whether or not they'll keep doing it is kind of an interesting question, and kind of where I left off before coming here.
I just always thought it was cool. I don't know if it was, I don't know, it's one of the duck symposiums, I guess, maybe the one in Annapolis. And who was the master, or who was the student before you on that?
Brett.
Dorak. Yeah. I remember hearing Brett's presentation on that at that, I guess that was Ducks 7 or whatever. But that's just so interesting to me, like they're on these, in these industrial parks, or they may even be on the top of a Home Depot or something like that, just some big roof and
targets. Yeah. Seems like we had a couple targets that they like to frequent. Even nesting. That was the other thing that I had a whole other section that was kind of working with USDA to understand nesting and nuisance problems. But we had birds nesting on rooftops. Like, just the adaptability of those things is crazy.
Man, that's incredible. Yeah. I can imagine what that was like going into the Home Depot or something and being like, "Can we get up on your roof?"
Yeah.
We've got geese up there.
I had a transmitter dead. I'd been traveling. There might have been a conference, but I knew it was dead. I was like, "Oh, there's nothing's gonna happen." Well, I show up to this warehouse, and number one, a orange safety vest and a clipboard will get you a lot of places in Chicago.
Yeah.
I won't say too much. But trying to find a way up on this rooftop, and I get up there, and there's a crew there, and they go, "Oh yeah, we're about to demolish this place." It's like we're supposed to be done last week, but we're just wrapping up this week. Got a few more things. So like, I've got to get up there and get this, $3,000 goose transmitter.
Yeah.
Before he got it. Sure enough, sure, let's go. He thought it was crazy, but yeah, just lying dead on top of a rooftop, probably from exposure or old age, but one picked it up, and it was good.
It's so crazy. Yeah, I mean, a lot of good stories from waterfowl research.
That's that's the fun part. I mean, I'm to the point where I enjoy some of the analyses and the coding and a little bit of the writing. But yeah, the field work and working with all the neat people in our field is a big part of why we enjoy it so much.
And to that, I guess we can wrap up with quickly. You mentioned it earlier, but y'all's a student certificate program. I think that is absolutely an amazing thing that y'all put together there, and because getting students more of that applied opportunity, you get finish up with your undergrad, and depending on where you go to school, some places are more applied than others, and even in the applied schools, there's a lot of times where students haven't really made that connection quite yet, where between the ecology and all the things they learned in school and this boots on the ground management, and what y'all are doing over there is helping make that connection for students and opening their eyes to a much, what this field can really be and what kind of impact they can have. And I think that's just tremendous.
Thanks, James. Yeah, thanks. No, and that's absolutely. I'm kind of, I was fortunate to grow up around hunting, to grow up a little bit on the management side. I mean, nothing like the scale we're doing, like putting a spreader on the back of a Argo was, kind of our big contribution to waterfowl management. Spraying 2,4-D, probably places that we shouldn't have been, and not wearing the proper PPE. Those kind of things. But all kind of through my training, it was really research focused, a lot of computer work, a lot of writing, a lot of analyses. Really not, I mean, if I were to go, and I probably could have been qualified to go to some decent positions, at a refuge for Fish and Wildlife Service, I wouldn't have a clue what to do on the actual management side. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd be learning from the people that were on the ground doing that. And that's the kind of a problem we've perceived with a lot of undergraduate universities, and there are a few. I mean, Mississippi State, Texas A&M, University of Arkansas, Monticello, and Stevens Point, my alma mater. I'll give them credit. There are programs that are still very kind of hook and bullet, applied ecology, getting boots dirty focus, but there are a lot that are just kind of going to train more academics. And on one hand, we've got those academics going to like state and federal agencies that just don't really have a full comprehension of what it takes to make these things work. And then you end up with stuff like, okay, no genetically modified crops on Fish and Wildlife Service properties, or all herbicides are bad, those kind of things. We don't want that, because obviously we can't really enact conservation on a landscape scale without a lot of tools that those people don't fully understand. On the flip side, a lot of our habitat managers come from a farming background. They know how to operate the equipment. They've got the skills to grow things, but they tackle it as a farmer. I mean, they want it to look pretty. They're not thinking a lot about kind of the whole ecosystem, about these different ecological concepts that we think are really important if we're going to move beyond just kind of single species management and really improve it for all waterfowl species and all wildlife species. So yeah, that's where I kind of see our niche is taking students that have that academic ecology background, bringing in some of that farm on the ground, dirty boots management, and better preparing them for going out in the field. And we've been incredibly lucky. James really pushed one of his former students, Patrick, to us, and I remember cleaning out culverts with Patrick last year that beavers had stopped up. I mean, getting in the nastiest mud with cottonmouths, snapping turtles, and who knows what else, doing all sorts of the hard work and developing those skills that it really takes. And he's doing a great job with Ducks Limited, and all of our students right now are meaningfully employed. I mean, doing things for wetlands and waterfowl. We're really proud of that. We want to continue that. We want to continue to attract really great people to this program and hopefully benefit wetlands across the country.
Yeah, and that's absolutely incredible too. Like you said, just like a lot of the waterfowl managers historically coming from the farm and kind of treat it like a farm, but we also have these students that have never seen any of that equipment. And so going through a program like that is actually, creating you a really kind of what you're really hoping to want is taking somebody that, knows kind of like the basic ecology, and you're giving them, one, that connection between the ecology and the management, and then two, giving them a little bit of turn row cred, because now they know how to calibrate a sprayer or whatever.
Yeah.
And right, so that's
even just being able to communicate with the actual farmers and land management folks is huge.
That would be huge, because even like I try to tell my students in my practices class when we're doing a lot of those, kind of really super applied land management, site visits and things. And I have some that they know they want to do the academic route. They want to get a PhD. They want to be a faculty member. And I'm like, well, you're going to have to understand this connection between these things, because if you're hoping your research has implications, management applications, then you might need to understand the management side too. So no matter what level they're going to stop at in in a wildlife biologist, whether they're going academic route or they want to be a boots on the ground manager or a private lands type consultant, you got to know this stuff, no matter what. And programs like yours, yep, they can help students do that. I know I've got at least one undergrad. I've already told him, I was like, you don't really have a choice when you finish your undergrad. You need to apply to the program at Five Oaks because you're going to have to go do that.
Yeah.
and then we'll talk about what you want to do after that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
really appreciate it.
I just really have a lot of respect for what y'all are doing with that program and everything else y'all have got going on. So,
thanks, James. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Well, we're over an hour now, so we should probably wrap her up.
Yeah, I've got you'll be jealous. I got an invite to go have a cookout at Scott Manley's place on White River.
Oh man, dang! Well, Scott will probably cook you something good.
I expect he will. He will. There might be some beverages consumed as well.
Yes, there'll be that too.
We'll see. We'll see. Yeah.
Well, tell Scott
I appreciate
I said hello.
James. Yep, absolutely will. Hey,
all right. Well, thanks
stay in
so
touch.
much. Thanks for joining us on Gamebird University podcast. To keep up to date on when new episodes are dropped, or for more information on game birds and their management, you can follow us on Instagram at MSUEXT_Gamebird, or follow us on Facebook at MSU Extension Gamebird Program.